Hey, welcome to Relove Guitars. Sam here. Summer has arrived. Sorry about this noise. Well, that was good, I switched that off, but just to give you a little view of our summer. There's Claire with her recovering arm. Wave at you with her left arm. No, she can't. So here we have the summer finally arrived in the Relove Guitars world. And this is where I take my tea breaks. Anyway, so let's get stuck in with some more guitars. Here we have an Epiphone, looks like a 400 SG. Now I'll probably say that and then somebody say no it isn't. I don't know what it is, okay? It's an Epiphone. It's in a nice heritage cherry finish with a satin sort of finish. It's a really good looking guitar. And this is, I've bought this for Adam to give to his son. He's asked me to find him a guitar, or I've suggested a good starter guitar. And this is it. And this was bought for £125 from a local guy. And it has one knock down here with a bit of lacquer cracking, but nothing serious. No structural damage at all. And it looks pretty good. That damage, whatever there is practically invisible. So we've got this lovely set neck in this heritage cherry finish, and you can see how good looking it is. Classic Epiphone, got Grover tuners, good quality tuners, rosewood fingerboard, all the neck length is outside the body, a couple of good nice sounding humbuckers, and the standard controls with a pick guard that was off, or scratch plate that was off when I got it, but I've just fitted it. So the other thing, or the first thing I've done with this guitar, sorry, let me rewind. The purpose of this was to find a guitar for Adam's son, and who's moving across from classical guitar at school. I think he's taken he's done very well at that, and so this is going to be his first electric. And so the reason I suggested this as a first electric is, first of all, it's totally cool. It's rock and roll, right? It's way cooler than a dreary black and white starter Strat, Squire Strat, which is, you know, very capable first guitar. But this thing has the history of rock and roll written all over it. It goes way back in time. Yeah, it oozes R&R. The other good thing about this is because it has a very, the neck is very far outside of the body. Actually, from a setup point of view, the neck is very flexible and allows me to set a really good low action, which hopefully will help and encourage Adam's boy to, I don't know your name, sorry. If you're watching this, Adam's son, I'll call you Adam Jr. Encourage Adam Jr. to be able to, sorry, my neighbours, to be able to form chords really easily. So compared to a classical guitar, this is going to feel incredibly easy to play. It already does, but there are a few choked out notes further up here that we can take care of. So bought this locally, or saw it come up locally. I'd watched it myself, I'd seen it myself and had a kind of a look at it. Anyhow, and then I went and had a look at it and bought it for the asking price, because it is in good condition and it's a quality guitar. It's as good, if not slightly better in finish, than the equivalent vintage neck through or set neck guitars. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. Alright, so anyway, I'm going to get on and do a setup on this. Now the first thing I've done here is, these guitars typically come a little bit head heavy because the body's so thin, and because the tuners are usually quite often these big heavy Grover things. Quite often you get a neck heaviness. So I've done something first and foremost with this guitar, and I'll show you what it is. I've cut some custom lead pieces and double-sided sticky tape them into place to give this guitar a little bit more weight. Now if it doesn't feel right to Adam Jr., then he can you can remove this, but I think it's a good idea for having this guitar playing on the strap to hold it in position. So what I do with this is I cut some sheets of lead or strips of lead from my roll of roofing lead, and I've double-sided sticky taped them all together, and then they can hang very neatly on the inside of here, and they fit perfectly with no obstruction to the pots. And I've avoided the switch and the jack plug. So anyway, what I had actually thought about was maybe as well putting a bit of foam on here in case, just so I can support it, because I don't quite know at the moment how far away from this thing. See, that obviously doesn't fit, so possibly a half thickness bit of foam, but actually I think this probably just about sits on top of those wires as it is. Feels just about right, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. It's highly unlikely to drop off. God almighty. Anyway, so here we are. So that was the first thing I did. And I also tightened up the jack socket, which had come loose, which it often does on these things. A point of weakness on these guitars, it's the only one of my only criticisms, apart from the balance issue. The only other real criticism is this. If you look inside, it's the jack, to have the jack socket on a very thin front edge, thin piece of the wood here, puts a lot of force into it. Because if you think about the kind of motion here, the jack plug's levering a lot of force into this, and it's very likely, very often splits the wood at this point. So I've tightened it up. You could, you know, if this was your own guitar and you wanted to make absolutely sure, you could strengthen that with some, I don't know, a piece of copper or something with, or a piece of plastic even with some resin, just to kind of get it strengthen it up a bit. So everything else plays on here pretty well, so I'm not going to do any adjustments in there. Nothing else needs doing. I'm just going to close it up. And so my job now with this guitar is going to be to set playing action the way I want it, check the nut, check the neck relief, and then I'm going to fret level it. Now there is a little interesting thing I spotted on this guitar when at the point of buying it, and it has a strange little kink in the neck. But having test played it, it's nothing that's going to get in the way of the thing playing. It's just a visual thing. When I looked straight down this edge has a little kind of raise here and then down into the dip, which is just a bit unusual, that's all. But again, it's not going to get in the way of playing. So what I'm looking at in doing setting the action, and again I'm thinking, I'm talking kind of to Adam and Adam Jr. here, young Mr. Adam Jr. The thing about getting a guitar to play well is you need to take care of the playing action, and most people kind of think of the playing action as being how high up these strings are, and a lot of guitars you may have played, including classical guitars at school for example, are likely to have a very high playing action. Now the SG, an electric guitar, will always feel like an improvement on a classical guitar anyway, but despite that, most electric guitars, especially budget ones, their playing action, how low this can be, is dictated by the evenness of the frets underneath here, and most guitars will be set with a very high action. So for example, the bridge will be, as this was, wound quite high off the deck. So when we do that, by adjusting the bridge here, right, we see you know, it stands high off the frets down at this end, and it feels quite hard to play further up the neck you go. Most guitars will come like that, and when they do come like that, they're often it's because underneath them there are uneven frets, and placing the strings as high as that is the only way to overcome those uneven frets. If you try and lower it, what happens is you dial this clockwise and you bring the action right down to where you might want it. By the way, not everybody wants it there, but that's the kind of action I typically set. But taking it right down, you might start to find buzzing noises. This is pretty good, but you can't do any bends, right? And that's because there are uneven frets in there. All guitars come with uneven frets, all guitars have them until they get leveled, and it's in leveling them you get to just free up those bends and make it playable. Now this guitar has 10 gauge strings on at the moment, which I'll swap out for 9s, but I'll do the setup work on 10s. So first thing is you've got a playing action down at this end, which is adjusted by the bridge up and down. You've also got a playing action, I call it, at this end, which is the height of the strings over the first fret. So I've got a bit of fingernail pulled, and you can see it when you look sideways. You can kind of measure how much the strings sit from the nut over the first fret. This isn't actually too bad. In fact, it's very low here on the B. In fact, it could be fractionally too low. It's important in doing a setup not only to get the action right at this end, for which you probably need to do precision fret leveling to allow it to play a low action, also to get the first fret action low, which is what I'll do as well. That makes the notes and chords down here really easy to hold down. So typically tricky chords like an F, which when people start playing rock guitar and want to play bar chords like an F, those can be really hard to play when you're new to it. Having this action down here as low as possible and as light as possible makes that process a lot easier, and could be much more rewarding. The other reason I set a low first fret action is if you set anything above about 0.5 millimeter here, notes played here go sharp when you press them, when you fret them, which can really spoil the chords and make them sound horrible. So there's a lot of good reasons for a low action down at the first fret, and that's done by setting cutting the nut slots until the string sits at the right height. That's quite a difficult, precise process to do because you have to use files to do it, but we'll do that. And then the other part of the combination of things is to set some degree of curvature into the neck. Now, a lot of people talk about a lot of people are confused, or people can be confused about why you have to have any curvature in the neck at all. The way I describe it is, I've lost my pen notes here. The way I describe it is this: if you've got an anchor point here, that's your nut, and you've got the bridge down here, and then you've got a string that sits between the two, okay, and then underneath that is the fretboard or the fingerboard, above which is sitting the frets, yeah. So, and so on and so on and so on. So when you strike the string, it doesn't just move side to side. What it does is it spins in a circle, right? That circle of spin is always bigger in the center of the string's length, right? So you have this kind of like a skipping rope. If you think about spinning a piece of string, you can see in the middle of the center of the string it spins the furthest. Now that means that when you strike a string, it's a chance, because it moves most in the center, if it's a low action, you've got a chance that it's going to hit these frets, right? And I call that string slap rather than fret buzz, if I can spell it right, string slap. Now the way to overcome that is one of two things. You can either raise up the point where the string starts by raising up the bridge and the nut, in which case you've got lots of room to spin that string in the middle and it doesn't hit the fretboard. Or the alternative, a bit messy drawing now, or the other alternative to help it out is to actually give that neck a little bit of a curvature, right, which brings the frets down a little bit. And you can see, there's the original diagram there, you can see that you just have enough room for the string, a little bit more room for the string to spin about. So quite often you'll hear people talk about wanting a dead flat neck, and that's fine. You can have a dead flat neck, and if you have a dead flat neck like that, typically what you'll find is that you have to probably raise the bridge height a little bit more to allow it to play okay, because once it, there's your frets again, once you play, as you bend the string, bad thumb, as you bend the string down, fret it there, boink, and then it comes back upwards towards this point here. What you're getting, because you've set a fairly high action, that high bridge action gives you that little bit of clearance there, so that from there onwards, you can see it's bigger and bigger as you go further. The string, the next string along from the fret you've pressed down on, is always got enough for the note to ring out. If you took this action down and you had a flat neck, right, take it down again, like I said, you get that kind of, not only you run the risk of the frets, uneven frets sticking up and getting in the way of the string, but you also run the risk of fret slap because there's not enough room. So an ideal situation for a lot of people who come to me, they want a low light action. So to them that looks like, it looks actually what it looks like, I'll do it, let's say that's flat. To them a low light action looks like a very slightly curved neck with a low first fret action of 0.3 to 0.4 millimeters over the first fret, an amount of relief between the straight string and the curved fingerboard of about 0.1 to 0.2 max, as measured in the middle of the neck, or the middle of the fingerboard, I should say. And then down here, a last fret action, not at the bridge, but at a last fret action of about 1.5 mils on the low E and 1.2 on the high E. And that typically, those three things give a very light and fast feeling action. Now, to get that sort of action, almost certainly 95+ percent of the time, I have to slightly level the frets, or gently level the frets, to allow that to play. You can set that action, which I'll do pretty much now, or we'll do in a minute. I can set that action, but what you can often find is that sometimes then you'll have notes that are choking, or if they're not choking, the uneven frets are, like in this case, the notes are playing a little bit buzzy. Yeah, you can hear. Okay, they're not even playing, and they're also not bending. So if I wanted to make that chosen action play, I've got to get in there and level those frets. So to begin the whole process, I've got to get those three components: first fret action, last fret action, and neck relief set to where I personally know that they work well. And the great thing about an SG is you can actually go a little bit lower than what I've just talked about on the whiteboard there. So when I come to a guitar like this, I start off by thinking about these three things. Now, smart people will notice that they're interrelated, so that if I set a high bridge action, it'll increase the first fret action as the string tilts upwards and heads up here, so that gap will get bigger. Equally, if I take this really low, that existing first fret action will close up as the string comes down to a lower bridge fixing. Equally, whatever I set as a first and a last fret action, if I then put a load of curvature in the middle of the neck, you'll see that stay there, magic arm. You'll see that what perhaps started out as a low first fret action, a low bridge setting for a low last fret action, but then you put a big curve, I've exaggerated it. It might feel okay down here. Suddenly you've got this very tall action down there, and it might feel a bit better over here. So putting a big curve in the neck actually has the effect of creating a harder to play action in the center. Now, it gives you the benefit of being able to hit the strings really hard, and they don't clatter on the, they're not doing it on here, but you can hit the strings really hard. If you've got a big strong acoustic strumming style or something, then you can really hit it hard with a strum, and you won't get fret clatter as the string goes round and hits the fret, but you will get this very tall feeling of a high action, even though you've actually set the first and last fret actions quite low. So we're going for a combination, as I put on the board there, of about 0.3 on the first fret, over the first fret, 1.5 as measured at the last fret, which is obviously set there, and then just a little bit of relief. So the first thing I do is, with those sort of figures that I use day in, day out for most electric guitars, I start by measuring the neck relief, and I do it very simply by holding the string down on the first and last frets, and with my thumb and an eyeball I examine the gap that is between the string and the middle of the fret, whatever number fret it is, 7 or 8, in the middle of the neck. Now the first thing you're looking for, it's very unscientific, the first thing you're looking for is there a gap at all? If there isn't, when you do this, the string will still be touching the frets in the middle, because effectively your neck will be back bowed, and if your neck is back bowed, think about that is as soon as you fret anything in the first half, it'll fret out straight in the strings will always hit the hump in the middle, so it won't play anywhere in the first half of the neck. But first thing you look at is you hold it down on the first and the last fret, touch in the middle, see first of all, is there a gap? Yes, there is. Is it within my range? I could get the feeler gauges out, but I know that's within range of about 0.25, 0.25. That's cool, I'm happy with that. So I'm not going to touch that. Beauty of it is it's not that critical. I can do the fret leveling with that set and get the guitar set up playing, and if I feel like it's too flat, i.e. I might be getting a bit of fret slap later and it doesn't suit my rhythm guitar style, then I can actually just dial in a little bit more curvature by adjusting the truss rod, and it doesn't hurt the guitar at all. You have to go quite some distance before you can damage the guitar by adjusting the truss rod, so I recommend that you do more than you don't. So for now, setting number 1, neck curvature, spot on, I can work with that. Now the issue with the nut is another question here. Epiphones have a very tall nut, and often I like to remove the nut and replace it with a bone one, but there aren't that many I have that fit this slot perfectly, so it can be a bit of a pain having to make a custom one from scratch, and before you know it, that can take 3/4 of an hour and still not get it right. So I'd much rather work with the existing one if I can. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the truss rod cover off for now. Okay, Adam Jr., if you've not seen inside a guitar like this neck is made of wood, and underneath the fingerboard wood, there's 2 kinds of wood. It's maple or mahogany. This one's mahogany for the neck, and then there's a thin rosewood fingerboard on that, which the frets are pressed into. In a trench behind this is a metal bar that looks like this. I'll show you. And it sits in the trench underneath this fingerboard, and this bit sticks out the end here. The adjuster sticks out the end, just so you might be able to see it poking through. And this is a clever device, 2 pieces of metal, and when you turn the adjuster, it either bends this into a curve or it flattens it back out. And that adjuster is designed to counteract the string's tendency to bend the wood. So when you load this with strings, it wants to bend the wood like that. So you dial the truss rod to bring it back to flat or whatever shape you want it. Okay, so that lives inside your neck in an electric guitar. You probably and almost certainly don't have one. What is going on here? It's like Grand Central Station. You don't have one inside the classical guitar. The other thing very different between a classical guitar, by the way, and an electric guitar, which you're going to notice, and it's going to really either suit you or you're going to find it really odd, is that looking across the shape of the neck on a classical guitar, you've got the kind of neck looking down it, right, where your hands go around it like that, and the classical guitar fingerboard tends to be shaped like that, and the frets are on it like that, which actually feels like that's what we would call concave, right? Looking at it that way, it's a sort of bowl or hollow shape. The electric guitar is completely different, and it's convex, right? And it sort of is like a hump or like a rounded shape. And this shape is, can be different. It can be really tight like that, or it can be flatter like that, or it can be almost flat. So guitars that have a very tight rounded radius, it's called, things like vintage Strats. Guitars with a very flat radius, things like Ibanez, some of the modern Ibanez guitars with like 22-inch radius, so really flat and ideal for tapping and fast shredding, as they say. God almighty. So, so this will feel very different to the classical guitar. I'm going to carry on doing this because I've got to do this work at this time, so apologies if you can't hear what I'm saying. It's just the way it is. Right, so the issue, coming back to this, is the nut. Right, the nut is a critical piece of equipment on your guitar. It is on a classical guitar too, but it really matters on an electric because you do a lot of kind of bending and stuff with strings. Now the nut's purpose is to keep the strings separated across equally in this plane across the guitar neck, and that's what it does by having slots. So the strings fall in the slots and they always stay that distance apart, but its job is to allow those strings to move through those slots and hold them at a good height above the first fret. Now when they come out of the factory, they're almost never set precisely, and usually they're very high. The slots aren't cut deep enough and you end up with too high a first fret action. My speciality is to reduce this or lower this with files till we get the right first fret action. Now I would prefer to work with this nut, even though it's plastic. It's not the best material in the world for a nut, but it's actually it's not bad material, if you know, and it looks the right sort of color. It's dark. I would replace it with bone. The reason I use bone is that it's dependable and I know how it behaves cutting, and it does the same thing each time, so I rarely get that wrong. With plastic it can be quite, it doesn't cut consistently, so if I try and do another plastic one, it can end up messing up, and then I have to go back to bone anyway. So ideally I would like to use this, also because the Epiphone nuts are tall. The only slight downside is this is a little bit low for my liking. It plays, but that B is a tad under what I would like, but the rest of them are close. Now I'm going to measure it with my feeler gauge just to see. Okay, and I bet you it'll be, wow, I don't know, it's going to be very low. So just to get a look at it, I get my metric feeler gauge out and I'll go for something like a 2.5, and I bet it's even less. I bet it's less than 1/10 of a millimetre, which it is, unfortunately. It might even be less than 1/10. Yeah, it is. That's a third, again, lower than I would go. So for this I would need to find myself a replacement nut. Now with this kind of guitar I like to use more and more an adjustable nut, but that's a bit more expensive. So I'm going to have a look and see if we've got anything that will do this job as a direct replacement. This one may be high enough. It's a plastic one, so at this point I can't get into the fret leveling part of things yet. I need to now remove this nut. If you didn't have any spares, you could solve this problem, solve in inverted commas, this problem by removing this nut and shimming it by putting a little material underneath it which would lift it up, and then you could kind of bring the slots down again to the correct height. I could do that with a little bit of black plastic and it would actually probably look quite nice, but I've got another black one here that I could use in case. Let's have a look and see what it would take. So I'm just going to try and look at that, that's well super glued in. Okay, well that's that nut done for. God blimey, this is well stuck in. Okay, now when you do that, you see there's had loads of super glue in there. That's just a kind of very solid kind of hard plastic. And here's another one that's possibly come out of an Epiphone in the first place anyway. It's the right size and shape and it's tall enough to do the job. So I will go with that because it suits the colour, even though it's not bone and it's not my preferred material. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up, if you can hear me, I'm going to clean up the nut slot and the base of the nut itself. So to clean up the nut slot, my thing I will do is just to carefully, I don't know how well you can see, probably not at all, my magic arm, come on. What I shall do is just, that took a little bit of wood at the bottom of the slot with it, so I just need to make sure that it's flat. So I get my flat blade in there and just put a little bit of a scrape to see. Now this one has got a bit of wood from a previous fitting. It will go in there nicely, but I need to just clean it up and take the excess material off it. So I've got a little flat block which I can start with to just basically get rid of the rosewood that's stuck to the underside of this. I have a bigger block if I need to. So let's start with this little one for convenience. There's quite a lot of wood stuck to the bottom there. It doesn't take too long to get it back. And then this face as well, because it's a little bit too thick to fit in the hole. Escape. So again, I'll probably need the big block because I can't get a good run at this. So this is the block I keep always to hand for this sort of thing. And we just push this slightly out of the way, keep it safe. So with this, wow, it is got a load of old glue on it that doesn't really come off very easily. Once I've cleaned the face of this up, then the thing I want to then do is concentrate on getting it down to the right height for this, because I don't want to cut. I want to cut as little downwards as possible because it's actually quite difficult to do. So if I can first of all put this in, measure how much too tall the strings currently sit, then I can work out how much to take off to get it to very close to where it ought to be. And then when I've got it to there, I can just do the fine tuning, the last bit. Okay, that looks like it's all cleaned off and done. I will need this still, but what I'll do is push it out of the way for a minute. Along with the blade. Okay, yeah. So I'm trying to minimise the amount of cutting I'm going to do. So this is pretty much a good match for this, and particularly because it keeps the colour scheme good. Now I'm going to put the strings back in here, and I'm going to just tighten up the strings a bit, and I'm going to then measure as close as I can with the feeler gauge the gap. Okay, I'll put it under approximate tuning, close to tuning as I can, so it just is sitting under the right tension. Okay, it's a fraction narrower than the previous nut, but it'll still do the job perfectly well. Oh, everyone playing in the fields now. So I just take a note off my amp. Okay, so now we've got an action that's way too high at this end, but the question is how much too high. So we know what we're aiming for, and we'll find out what we've got at both sides, and then we'll make a careful cut or sand down under that. So it's going to be really tall to begin with, so let's go with 60, 1 mil, let's go, this is 30, 130 to begin with. I bet it's as high as that, 130. No, not quite 130, so let's try 120. Let's take the 30 off and go with there's a 20. That must be a 20. Let's go 120. No, 120, not. Let's go one. Oh, hang on, I got too many bits there. That's hellfire. Too many bits. Let's go to 120 again. Nearly there. And let's go remove this one and go 110. I've kind of lost the numbers on here now, so it's all over the place. I think this is 110. Right, 110. So this is going to write this down. So on the bass side, we've got 110 over the first fret, and on the treble side, we might have similar. Yeah, possibly a little bit more actually. So let's go back up. So 1, 60, 40, 1, that's 30, no, We've got to go more, haven't we? What is it? 110, so we need more than 110. We need one, let's go 130. How do we get to 130? How do I? 61, 130. It's a big jump, maybe too much. No, 130 is good. Chuck a 10 in there. Can we add a 10? No, that's a 20. Let's go 150. 40, 60, that's 130, 130 and 20, 150. Right, that's 150. Okay, so treble 150. So we want 4.4, let's say target of 0.4, 0.3 on either side. So that is minus 110 on this side, and that is minus 80, 0.8 on this side. 0.8 plus 30 is 110. 110 plus 30 is 140, so that's 120. Okay, so I want to take 1 centimeter, 1 millimeter, 20 off either. Sorry, 120 off the treble side and 80 off the whatchamacallit side. Bass. So that's an interesting one to do. Now it's a black nut, so first and foremost I can't see what I'm marking or cutting, so I'm going to have to put some little paper on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is get this with a bit of masking tape on it, and it's all very dazzly, so I'm just going to put it straight on there. Then I'm going to cut around. I can find where I've now gone with the blade. Need a cutting edge, bit of metal will do. Right. So again, this is, we'll have to do this in a couple of stages, but this is so important to get right that we don't want to take any or take any risks with it. So now I've got a bit of masking tape on the front edge of the nut, and I can now mark on the, let's have a look at the base side. We're going to mark up 0.8. Now on this thing here, it's quite 0. Oh, come on, 0 on off 0. Right, 0.8, hardly any size at all, but we'll go to 0.8. We'll get a sharper pen as we can manage. So we're going on the base side, 0.8, which comes to there. Right, I'm going to mark that 0.8, and then I'm 1.20 is the other bit, the other end, and 1.20 on the treble side to there, which is a bit more. Now I'm now going to draw a line between the two, which is difficult because this is tilting over. I'm not really quite sure I'm going to stop it tilting other than this bit of lead. Stay where you are. Right, so with a straight edge of sorts, in this case a blade, I'm going to look at this again. I'm going to go base, so more on the treble, less on the bass. So I'm just going to line this up, and I'm going to draw a line that I know is slanted slightly, thinner at one end, fatter at the other. Okay, and that actually doesn't look quite like it's changed. It's about the same all the way across. So I'm going to keep an eye on that as I cut it. It's actually quite hard to draw because you can't hold the thing. But so I know I need to go a little bit over on the treble end than I've already done it. Now here's the fun bit. You can put it in a vise if you wish, and hopefully get it to stay. It won't, because of the curve, it's not going to stay particularly level. Then get a file, so we could get most of it done. So I know I'm going to cut more at this base end than the other one, and you have to grip it quite hard or else it is going to walk away. This plastic just doesn't want to cut, it wants to resist everything. It's sticky plastic. It's really, God, it's not really doing anything. It's probably better to do it with the sandpaper actually. It's not a very cooperative material. So going back to the sanding block, I'm going to keep an eye on my mark down there, and I'm going to push harder on this base end. It's very skiddy. It really is an odd material. Wow, weird stuff. Once I've got it evened up a bit, then I'll attempt to take off the same now on both sides and bring it to the same height all the way across. While I'm doing this, I'm also making sure that it's a 90-degree angle, because I need a flat angle for it to sit in the slot properly. Looks like it's cutting quite well, going where I want it to go. Obviously I want to stop just a little bit short of cutting it all the way to the max, because I don't want to end up having to shim it again. I don't want to over sand it at this point. I'd rather have a little bit more downward cutting to do than to mess it up. So I'm just going to scrape away this overhang to see where we've got to, and actually we're very close. So I'm going to just concentrate on the lighter grade just to square it off and smooth it off at this point. This is a very interesting material. I don't know if it is a graphite or whatever it calls itself, but it's kind of hard and soft all in the same thing. Right, so I'm going to just have a quick look now. I'll take off the paper for a minute now, and we'll just put this back in here, and I'll just quickly put the strings back on and see where we've got to. And chances are, as I've done this a few times this way, it's worryingly easy to overcut doing it that way, as I found out in the past too many times. But I think we might just be on the mark with a little bit of downward cutting to do. So with that in mind, I'm going to just do something else. So I think I'm close to where I want to be with the nut. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take off the strings again, because the reason we're heading this way is to be able to level the frets. And to level the frets with my amazing technique that I use, we're going to need a little bit of marker pen on the frets as the guide to show us what the fret leveling tool is doing. And it's a very good way of finding it out. So I'll show you how it works in a minute. And so we mark each of the frets up with a marker pen. Now, fret leveling, of course, removes metal, a certain amount of metal from the frets, but the method I use removes as little as possible, yet at the same time makes sure the frets are dead level, which is probably the main reason why I use that method. Okay, so I'm going to put all of these strings back in. We'll tune it up to roughly and close to in tune. Okay, now that's sat perfectly in there. That's looking like it's too low. Yeah, you see, that's what I hate about this. We've already gone too low on one side. I hate doing it up. Right, start again, you see. I mean, that was a spare nut anyway, but we could shim it. But let's have a look and see if we've got anything else we can use that will do the job, because I'm fed up with that. Another one. This might even be better actually for the full width. Yeah, it is. There we go. Let's just see how far this one's off the mark. This may just be, we may just be lucky. Yeah, that one. See, that's why going up, trying to remove material from the bottom can be just a pain in the backside, because you either do it in lots of little tiny stages, which can take you forever, or you can you just never get there. Okay, now this one, again, this one's already too low. It's the problem with the Epiphone. The real best solution for this, I might the best solution for this by miles is to fit an adjustable nut. Here's one I've bulked, I've actually built up that we could use. Again, that's way too wide. What the hell was that from? I don't know. It's annoying. It's very annoying. Here's one that's had some building up. Again, that's probably too. Is that too short? Or the right width? Just about the right width. But again, that's too short. That's the problem with these Epiphones. Keep getting caught out because they're too tall in the nut department. This one, no, that's way too wide. What the hell was that for then? What kind of guitar is that for? That's a monstrously wide nut. Yeah, so I think the best bet is one of these adjustable ones that I use more and more. However, like I say, it's an extra additional expense. There's a graphite one, and that's sort of the right size, but is that anywhere near the right height? Let's try this. Again, these are spares I've had a while because I tend not to use black nuts. This may just be alright to start off with. Actually, we may have a lucky break here. Gone quiet now, thank goodness. Okay, just give these a quick pull to pull any slack out of them so they'll stay roughly in tune. Okay, I'm going to work off this nut then, and I'll put these other ones that can go in the bin, that broken chipped one. Put the other ones in the spare department for possible future use. Probably not. And this is the worst kind of material for cutting. I don't like this material at all, the so-called graphite. However, we are pretty close to being in the right sort of range. So what I'll do is I'll set my feeler gauge now to the 0.30 of a mil. That one's actually just a little fraction below. So we're going to have to go a tiny bit below. Let's go up to 0.25. Okay, that's on the mark there. So 0.25 is the target, a little bit lower than perhaps normal, but it'll do. Okay. So I'm going to start, so my idea here, or my aim here, is just to get these first fret heights exactly right to kick off, and then I can go into the fret leveling. So here I'm going to use a combination of 2 files. I'm going to use, or 3. I'm going to use a sort of jeweler's V notch file, and I'm going to use the correct nut file for that sort of gauge. So there's very little to take off, so I'm not going to need to use the jeweler's file. So I'm going to cut down with the nut file, and I can feel it bouncing off it already. It's like a rubbery solute. This material is kind of rubbery almost, and it springs off the blade just springs off. It's just ridiculous. So I'm going to try to take a little bit of downward cutting with this file. The aim is just to get where we need to get. So I'm just keep measuring with the feeler gauge till we get down to the height we want. Pretty close actually, a little bit more. these things, this material, so the files are good, this material is quite inconsistent in how it cuts. Okay, on the mark. Call it quits there. Same here, that's pretty much bang on the money, and same with this first one. So we'll leave those first ones alone. Now we'll just take these bottom two off and we'll switch to the correct last three files, and now we're going to work outwards from the D, which I think is bang on. I'm going to adjust that one. So I think we got lucky with this spare nut. That's actually very close to on the mark as well. And then I think it's only this one that probably needs adjusting. So we're on the low E, and we've got a little bit of room there. Now I've got to be very careful. This is a thick slot or thick gauge, so I've really got to be careful not to take too much in one go and end up massively overcutting and ruining all the good work. So I'm cutting, when I cut, I'm cutting at the angle, similar angle backwards that the rest of the strings are going over the nut. And it keeps a consistent break angle over the nut. A little tiny bit more and we're almost there. God, it has gone quiet now. Lord of mercy. So once we've got these three parts of the action, the first fret, the last fret height, which we haven't set yet, I'll double check it in a minute. Once we've got those three components, the first fret, last fret and curvature, or the relief of the neck, then we're ready to fret level. And think about it from this way. What we're doing is we're setting an action, an ideal action that we want. And although the frets, by the time we've set that action, the frets really don't like it. They're not in fit state to work with that action. What we then do with the fret leveling is we make the frets comply effectively. So we choose the action and then we make the frets work with that chosen action. And that's what's different about this method to many others, and that's why I like to do it. Gives us the choice and we make the frets comply. It also means that when I've leveled this, we don't make the frets any more or less level than is needed to make this chosen action play well. So we're not making them absolutely level just for some nice notion of absolute levelness. We're making them only as level as they need to be to play well at the action we've chosen. Get back on your thing, right? Okay, so that's good. I'm happy with that. Now let's check the final bit, which is the last fret action, and adjust that. Currently it's probably really low. Whoa, 1 mil and half a mil. That's mad. It's crazy too low. So we don't need it that low. We'll go up a bit to 1.ish to 1.1, 1.2 at the last fret. There it is. And then we'll go just a tad up on the lower E to about 1.5, and then we'll get it playing. Right, a little bit of choking there. Now an SG should play comfortably at that nice low action. The necks are great for that. So I'm going to fret level, which is part of my part of the price of my setup anyway. Having got those three components, the first fret action, the last fret action, and the neck relief set. I'm now going to level it, level the frets to make them play. And so the indicator that this is working is when we hear, okay, so remember 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, bending on the 16th fret on the high E. Okay, we've got to free that up. Now it's choking as it comes across into the middle area here, so that's where we're gonna, when we get to the G track, if you like, that's when we're going to free up that choked off bend. But as I say, an SG is more than capable of playing at this sort of action, so we're going to just coax it into shape with a bit of fret leveling. And here we go. So what I use is this fret leveling bar, and I start by basically calibrating or tuning this tool. Remember, it's a bar with two pieces, and when you turn the adjuster it causes the whole thing to curve, and what I'm doing is I'm tuning this rod to have a slight curve on the bottom rod, or a curve overall, and then on the bottom flat side of it I've got 400 grit sandpaper, wet and dry, double-sided sticky sandpaper, and so I then gently work it up and down the frets in what I call the E track, which is this thin little segment where the E string moves. Of course, the E string, or sorry, where it lives, the E string moves across when you bend it, as you know. So what it's doing is it's cutting here, here, here and here, not much there, none there in these three frets, and then cutting a bit everywhere else. So there's a little low patch right here and a little high patch here, which is cool. And we should expect everything to play cleanly when we play single notes, which is what it was doing before. The main challenge was getting these, was freeing up some bends. Tiny little bit of zing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back to where it was, and I'm going to use this tool just to sort of focus, if you like, on this last fret, just to clear that little zingingness. Now when I say focus, I'm literally just pressing a little harder at this end, which is kind of a little cheat, but I'm doing it because I know it's the last fret and I can afford to just hammer it a little bit harder there. So when we come right at the end, it's cleaned that out perfectly. So now we recalibrate. It's the same, actually it's the same place we're calibrating between the E and the B, but I'm just going to recalibrate for the next slot, the B track, and assuming it's changed a little bit while I've been using it, so tiny little adjustment, and the adjustments on this tool are so tiny that I couldn't even see that turn, but it's turned enough just to get that little bit more bend into it that we needed. And then we level all the frets in the, if you like, the B track, and again mostly it's the weight of the rod doing the work with the very relatively gentle 400 grit sandpaper on there. Now this is, not only is it leveling the frets in the B track so that all the notes in the B track should play cleanly, but what it also should mean is that now as we bend the E across, it shouldn't be choking out now as we get into the B track with the E string, but we know it's in the G track that it's choking out. So B, okay, 16, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, choking in the G area, zinging a tiny bit in the B. So I'm going to do a little bit more in the B using the same calibration that we're on, and then I'm going to focus a little bit more now down at this end as I do it, and then I'm going to move across to the G, where I should begin to see that choke disappear. If you ever do something like this and you find that you're so low with your action that you just cannot get that fine, you can't free up every single choke like this. Okay, it's not bad in the B, bending out into the G. If you get to a point where you just, no matter how much you level it, you can't seem to free up it usually will be because you've chosen a very low action like this, then you can make an absolutely tiny upward action movement on the bridge, which you would hardly even notice, but it's a huge amount, relatively speaking, when it comes to clearing those chokes. But I'm obviously aiming to do it this way first, and then if I get to a point where I just cannot free up the last bit of that bend, then I will make a tiny action raise. But I like to set a low target action first and aim to achieve that with fret leveling before anything else. And you should see in a minute, once I've got this G track now done, you'll hear that I should be able to bend that E string right into the G, which of course gives us a bigger bend and a higher, high number of tones as we bend it. So you can see quite an interesting pattern in terms of the high frets here. We've got this crunchy, this chunk here that are low. We've got high ones here, pretty high one there, 2, 3 high ones there, high one there, low in between those two, low all the way along there, and then they're all cutting a little bit. So it's a low spot right there, which is unusual. We quite often find them there. But the interesting thing about fret leveling is that your low frets are what kind of dictate what's possible, because a low fret will make the other frets effectively or relatively high. See, we're almost clear. Now that is, if I think where that's choking out, that's sort of between the D and the G. So I could do a little bit more on the G, and then I'll move across to the D, and I think together those two things will free up that last little bit of choke. But that's what's nice about this method, unlike other fret leveling files where you take all the strings off and make sure the neck is flat, you do it that way. There you can't hear with your own ears the unevenness clearing up, which you can hear. So before, when I bent this note, we couldn't get any note. Now we're getting right across to the D now. So now I recalibrate in preparation for the D track and so on. So it's a really elegant method. It's not mine. It came to me by seeing somebody's tool. Somebody had created a tool called a katana, which was pretty expensive. It did effectively this, and for one reason or another, brackets, the seller of the katana was an absolute jerk, and it made, even though I bought the tool, it meant I couldn't use it. He was so rude and offensive, it was impossible for me to use it any longer. So I stopped and I had to improvise, and I found I could improvise my own tool that does the job just as well for £0. So it's kind of poetic justice, really. If somebody can invent a perfectly workable alternative for no money from spare parts, then you're going to struggle to sell $150 a time tool to do the same thing. Okay, so again, the same patterns going across, cutting here quite a lot, these three. One bit of cutting there, quite a bit there, none there, cutting. So low spot down there, but it's not causing too much of a problem. It's below the target action we've chosen. So obviously I want to make sure that D notes all play. Which they do. Okay, so with this, right, I'm going to give you an example now. So we are at an incredibly low action for any kind of guitar. This is barely over 1mm there and there. So if I were to take this and do a quarter of a turn upwards on both of these, okay, and then we go. So that solved that without taking any more fret metal off. So I'm happy to go with that the way it is. I'd rather make that tiny adjustment there because it's still a very low action. If I did that a little adjustment and we still didn't have those notes, those bends coming out cleanly without any choking, then I would probably continue fret leveling. Okay, so it's a bit of a kind of judgment call all along the way as you go. It takes a bit of experience to figure it out, but it's actually a very good method. If you've got no, you know, even when you're doing it for the first time, I sell an ebook showing you how to do it, and tons of people have emailed me saying, you know, I did my first setup using your method on a whatever, you know, a fairly budget guitar, or some people do go straight and do it on their expensive guitars, and they always report a great improvement. So even the first time they do it, the system works for them, but you know, you get better at reading it as you get more experience, and you can make better calls with the more experience you have, which is kind of like all things in life. So let's get this last bit done now. Again, as we go through, first priority is all the individual notes and then any possible bends. Very clean notes. That's what I love about the SG, and that's why I recommended this. You know, there are not many guitars you can have as low an action currently as this is, with notes playing as all out clean as that. So it is an exceptional instrument because of its design. The only thing they got wrong, as I mentioned before, is the weight, the body to neck weight ratio. Gibson got it wrong. You know, the design was lovely, you know, beautiful body shape and all that, but to make it so imbalanced was a mistake, because actually professionally it makes it, well, I'm not a professional player, but if you're in a band, it makes it kind of almost unusable, and unless you've got a big chunky strap with kind of, I don't know, Velcro on it to stop it moving, or you play it sort of pointing straight up in the air, which is, I think, you know, like AC/DC used to do, that kind of thing. So that's why I put some ballast, some lead sheets in here, because it's such a good guitar that it's an absolute shame to not be able to play it. The reason it's unplayable, in inverted commas, is despite being a great guitar, it becomes very tiring to hold. You find yourself actually holding it up and trying to play, which will cost a lot of energy. Wow, brilliant. So, now of course the pitch has gone up slightly, representing the little lift I gave to the bridge. Yeah, fine, happy with that. So we got where we wanted to go with very little fret metal removal. Got it incredibly low action, really. And the nice thing about this is that we're done in the precision setup part, and most of what happens now is cleaning up. We need to stick the nut down properly. In fact, what I'll do before I take it off, take the strings off, I'm going to use the strings as a bit of an anchor just to hold the nut in place. So I'm just going to slack off enough to get the nut out, put a little bit of glue in, and redo up the strings so that we can use the strings to press to keep the nut in place while the glue dries. So yeah, the point is, having done the precision setup part of things, what it means now is, actually, while these are off, let's do something else. It means that the next thing we do is cleaning up any fixes or cosmetic things we need to do, and then we can put on new strings and the guitar will be pretty much ready to go. So the kind of hard inverted commas precision work is pretty much done. And the nice thing about doing it under strung conditions is that any time now that we put a set of strings on this guitar with the same gauge, it will go exactly back to the same configuration, because the loading will be the same, the neck will respond the same, and the frets that we leveled to work with that with that string gauge will be the same. Now we are going to change string gauge so that we may get a very slightly smaller amount of curvature, but we can just adjust that manually. This is really dazzling me, still dazzling me. Right, I'm just going to do another important part here before I glue this and put the strings on again, because I'm just going to round off any flat edges on the frets that we've just leveled. Now there isn't going to be an awful lot on here because most of these haven't cut up much, but one or two have more than others. So this one's in that sort of slight hump that I mentioned at the beginning, and that's the only downside, is that it made this fret stick up a little bit more, hence it's taken more to level it out, but it's still a very small amount, and you know, I can tell by the relative speed or ease with which I'm sort of whizzing through this fret crowning process now. I'm using a fairly expensive StewMac American offset diamond crowning file, which is, in my experience, is well worth the money. I've had it nearly 5 years probably, and I've been using it non-stop, and it's still performing brilliantly, so absolutely worth every penny. You can do it in other ways, and my ebook shows how to do it with a £5 or £6 file, but if you do as many setups as I do, or if you're going into business doing that, then you know, it makes a lot more sense to have a quicker a tool that gives you a quicker job, because you know, time then becomes money in a business sense. If you're doing your own guitar, then it's not an issue taking 3 times longer to do this job. I mean, it's taken me maybe 3 minutes to do this, so we might take 10 if we did it manually with the other file. You know, on one guitar, your own guitar, what's 10 extra minutes is nothing, it's no big deal. But if you did 3 of these a day or something, you'd care about that extra gap, or that saved time. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some glue on the bottom of here and place it in here, line it up as good as I can, get the strings in quickly before it sets down. And the main thing is, while I'm here, while it's still got a bit of flexibility, just get it lined up the way I need it, which is about there. Right, and then I'm going to go in pairs because I don't want it to pull either way. Now the neck is still dirty, covered in fret dust and so on, but all I want to do now is just put it under normal tension so that the strings will hold down the nut while it dries. That's always going to happen. That doesn't really matter for now because that's the end of this string anyway, and there's enough pressure or tension on here to hold the nut in place. But that's what happens. That's why I use this onboard strings as sacrificial strings, because they will pretty much always break after a few ons and offs and a few tightens up and untightens. So that's that one dead. Okay, so I keep doing this next bit off camera, and people keep getting slightly annoyed that I do. So I wanted to see the sanding process, so I will carry on and do it on camera for once. Just going to clean off some of this dirt with my fingers a minute. So once that nut is set, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck off these old strings, brush the fingerboard down, get the bulk of the dust off it. Then I'm going to use some naphtha solvent to remove as much of the dust as possible. And then I'm going to mask off all the fingerboard so I can then polish out these frets. And at the same time, once I've polished them, I'll also give the fingerboard a thorough clean, and the rest of the guitar as well. And we can, it's all working really well, but it'd be nice to have the bridge polished up a little bit. It's got a lot of dust on it over the years by the look of it. So a good spruce up, but we can do all of that with these bits off. But yeah, almost always you're going to, when you use sacrificial strings to do a setup, kind of sew off. There goes the other one. The B is just broken now. I just can't take the constant toing and froing, doing up and undoing. So eventually they go, and I'd much rather it was these sort of, you know, sacrificial strings, the old ones that we're on, rather than new ones that we put on. Okay. Yeah. So all in all, so far, looking at how it's set up, I'm happy with it. I think it's a nice condition guitar. It's a very nice quality SG. You know, the Epiphones, the comparison between the Epiphones and the vintage, for example, they're very, very similar generally, although I think the finish on this is nicer looking than the plain black or glossy cherry of the vintage. I have to say I prefer this this understated matte heritage cherry, I think they call it, something like that. I think it's a nicer look. And I think the Epiphones, the tuners are a little bit better, and the pickups are better, I think, as well. I prefer them. Although, you know, having said that, the vintage guitars are still a very nice guitar and not shabby at all, especially for a first guitar. You know, it's a lot of guitar for the money, for a beginner. So, and the other thing about the Epiphone versus the vintage is this one will hold its value longer, or have a better resale value than the vintage, which you can get a great bargain really cheap, but you won't get too much for it. This should be able to sell this in 3 or 4 years time for exactly the same money as you paid for it. Okay, so I'm just gonna dust off. I'm gonna wipe the dust off for a minute. I'm not really actually, no, I will clean it off while I'm here. The thing about so we're gonna in a minute we're gonna polish these frets with various different grades of sandpaper, but to begin with I'm going to use some Coleman's cooking fuel, or naphtha as it's otherwise known, to clean each of the frets and the so we're cleaning partly the pen I've just used, cleaning off the frets, but we're also cleaning sort of historic goo off the fingerboard, so it's kind of nicely cleaned out for Adam Jr. Don't have someone else's DNA all over it, basically. And then once we've done that, sorry, I was just trying to give you a bit more panoramic view. And then I'll also go with the whole body right now and just give it a quick polish down with this stuff. Because it's a satin finish, there's no point using any kind of scratch remover pastes or anything like that. This is a very useful, durable finish that doesn't show up tiny scratches anywhere near as much as the gloss finishes do, which is another reason why I think it's a very good option, this finish. And I use a kind of satin nitro finish on a lot of guitars that I make, because it's easier to do and to make look good than trying to work with high gloss finishes, which need a lot of polishing and buffing, and then they show up even the tiniest little mark everywhere. you only have to breathe on them. So with this stuff I can just go over all the surfaces and it will remove grime and grease and fingerprints and stuff and shine up the tuners a little bit. So well, worth just going over it so it spruces it up after it's sitting around wherever it's been sitting for a while. The other thing, the thing I mentioned about the balance on the original Gibson Les Pauls, but also these Epiphone Les Pauls, which are allowed to be called Les Pauls because they're made by the same parent company, sorry, SGs. Apparently Les Paul didn't ever want to put his name to this model, so whilst he certainly was associated with the Les Paul shape that we know and love, he kind of ducked out when it came to this one. It was too radical and not anywhere near close enough to his style. But I forgot what I was going to say now. But from the original design, these were really nice thin body. They just were too top heavy, so they never worked. And that, so, people who copied them, a number of people who copied them, made them slightly differently and in such a way that the body had a bit more weight in it. Sorry, not the body had more weight, but the centre of gravity moved, so they set the neck further in to the into the body, which worked in many of those guitars. So some of them, like K's and Satellites and Columbuses and even Antorias, I think, some of those old Japanese made in Japan copies actually worked pretty well because of that redesign, and people realised that the way around the top heaviness was to change the positioning. But even that, on some guitars, even that's not enough. And also it sort of makes the top frets harder to get to again, which defeats the object of the SG, because in a way the real point of the SG was to have all of these notes outside of the body that you can get to them all with great ease, and it's a sort of soloist's dream, or lead guitarist's dream. So anyway, so that's always been a problem with the SG, and it's a problem that apparently really Gibson haven't even solved to this day. So I came up with an answer to it, and I've made a few of my own using this stuff here, which is Eki, which is a beautiful granite-like wood. I mean, this weighs probably nearly twice as much as this. So I can make it actually slightly thinner than the original, and I can put all the correct balance back into this, so it balances and plays perfectly. Of course, it's ultimately a little bit heavier than the original SG, because it has to be in order to to really balance this neck. But it's a lovely. I've made two. I've got one that I play and sold one, and I've got two more on the go down there for sort of summer projects. But it's a lovely wood to solve the problem with. And because it's so dense, this Eki wood, it's an African hardwood, but because it's so dense, it allows me to keep the keep the thickness of the body down to very close to, if not less than, the original Gibson. So it has that lovely thin vintage feel that this guitar is known for, but without the top heaviness, which is what I like. Okay, so I'm not going to re-oil the fingerboard yet, because what I really am interested, first of all, is masking it off to do the polish out. So I'm going to use my masking tape for that purpose. And obviously, as we get further down the fretboard, we're going to get frets closer together, and I'm going to need to cut tape to get a series of thinner and thinner strips. And you can buy different sizes of masking tape for this purpose, but to me that gets a bit too expensive, so I prefer to just have a cutting board here, and I cut my own every time, and often cut my fingers with it, but yeah, it don't matter. Now, the only downside, by the way, about learning electric guitar on an SG is it is unlike many of the other types of guitars in that because the neck is outside of the body, it feels like everything's further out that way. So if you kind of, I don't have any problem playing moving from one guitar to the next, but you just have to keep in mind if you were to pick up your friend's Les Paul or a Strat or something, where you're comfortable, you're familiar playing a bar chord of G or something, it's going to be further along here than on the SG, and you may take a few minutes to adjust, get your head around it, because it is different in that respect. So this is now looking really nice and clean. Everything pretty much getting there. It's actually lovely. All the dust is gone. So now what I'm going to do is get my cutting board. Yikes. And you can see leftover bits of paper from previous setups. If I can get this off. There's actually been a regional shortage, famine of low-tack masking tape, so I've been having to use, well, they call it low-tack, stuff bought online, but it never is. It's usually a much stickier, gooier glue, and so it's not ideal. But that's the problem. If you can't get it locally, you have to trust what you get online, and you're never going to end up sending something back saying, I deny that this is, I want my refund. This is not low tack. Who's going to do an empirical test and prove you right or wrong? It ain't going to happen. So what I do when I do this is I use 4 strips of masking tape along this board, and then I cut them into different thicknesses, and this particular pattern of cuts will give me basically enough to mask off an entire guitar. The only time I have to vary the sequence, boringly, is when I do a 24 fret, something like an Ibanez, which you need some even thinner bits. So the standard sort of tape cutting won't cater for the 24 fret Ibanez. But so the 2 of these strips I cut into thirds. It's actually very difficult to cut in this short space, small space. Yeah, 2 in thirds and then 2 in halves gives me enough for the whole shebang. And so the next stage is to, oh come on, I'm cutting the ruler now, not the paper. The next stage is to polish out the frets now, and then we'll restring, we'll oil the fingerboard, restring with a new set of 9s, and then we'll check the intonation, and all will be good. It's a handsome beast, this guitar, I've got to say. It's very nice. Alright, so that goes up there. Come back here with this. Right, so now I use the smaller bits. Righty-o. So tomorrow we're looking at another day like this, and so I'm going to be mixing it with a mixture of guitar work and short breaks in the sunshine and the hammock. And then Wednesday, it's my 56th birthday. Can you believe? Can I believe? 56 years old. Who could ever have thought I would get to be that old? Not sure I thought I would be. Yeah, so I got there, touch wood. Well, I haven't yet, but almost. Got a bee or a wasp in here now. Okay, so I'm showing you the boring stuff, and I'm also going to show you the sanding stuff, which is equally boring. But this will be a first all the way through for a long time from start. Actually, it's not true because I didn't show you the lead cutting. I made a little template and then I cut several sheets of lead into the same shape so that I could be sure that they would all fit inside when I put the back cover on, and it did. Okay. So, like I said, the SG is a very, I think it's a very good first guitar. And although I didn't have that, I had a strap style thing, but actually it was a toy guitar. It was one of those satellite, made in Japan plywood toys, and I got it from my dad. Wouldn't help me buy it with my pocket money. He wouldn't go guarantor, so things were difficult in the family world at that time, and a friend, school friend's mum helped me buy it via her catalogue, and of course it was Grattan's catalogue special, you know, made in Japan junk. And it's funny because you still see people advertising this type of guitar, and you know, they say because it's got made in Japan, like the K's, the Avons, the Shaftesbury's are quite good, the Avons aren't too bad, Columbuses, K's, Satellites and so on. All these old guitars, you see people still now advertising them. As soon as they see the made in Japan bit, they kind of crow on about it. And in fact, in those days, the made in Japan meant nothing particularly good. They were awful quality. I mean, they were all made from a horrible, crappy plywood. They had sort of pretend pickups, single coil pickups, you know, in large containers, trying to look like humbuckers in some cases not even bothering, like on mine. And they were weedy, and they had awful playing actions, and the fingerboards would never actually rosewood. They were just painted, some wood painted brown, which always then came off and so on. So they just were truly horrors, and to see people now thinking they're going to get £200 for one of them, it's laughable really, because it says made in Japan on it. But having said that, there are some made in Japan creatures that are wonderful. You know, I've just recently acquired a made in Japan Antoria Les Paul copy from literally in the lawsuit era. You know, you can see when you look at the headstock, it's identical to a Gibson headstock. So, you know, it was clearly one of those that got shut down, or you know, they stopped them making them. But it's an absolute beauty. It shares almost nothing in common with the made in Japan Grattan's catalogue bits of junk that I started out on. But this is a fabulous first electric guitar, there's no doubt about it. Real quality. And with a great setup, I've got to say. And the thing is, Adam Jr., you know, your mates, nobody's going to have a guitar with an action like this on it. You know, if your guitar playing friends at school get their hands on this and feel the action, it's going to ruin their playing on their own guitars. Okay. So, last bit of, what am I doing? Three grades of paper polishing out. It's a very manual process. There's no high tech involved. It's just repetitive and noisy, so it's not very conducive for video chat. So we start out with 2 bits of 600, 2 bits of 1000, 2 bits of 1500. And then move on to a set of micro mesh pads that goes from 1500 through to 12,000 in 9 stages. And by the time you get through to that, then it's pretty much play ready. So here's our micro mesh set. Here's a block. Now I always do, for some reason, I always like to do the first one by hand. So I like to feel the frets, and I like to look and see that I'm getting the initial, the major scratching off each one of these frets, and I can really do that with by doing it by hand. While I'm also at it, I like to take any sharp bits off the edge of the frets as well. So kind of lean over into the end bits. And then I like to switch over, same bit of paper, but switch over to the other way. Again, I can see from a different angle. Now when you're doing this polishing, if you do it, it is possible, if you stayed in one place for too long, you could undo the nice fret leveling that we've done. It's possible to wear a dent out of it, but the trick is to just be conscious of not staying in any one place for too long. So it's mostly up and down. Tend to get sort of 2 goes out of each piece using the pad. Some folks like to put 10 gauge strings on a SG because it's a Gibson scale length. And some players, experienced players, find that a 9's too bendy for them. But I think for a first guitar, I think a 9's is probably a good start point. And if Adam Jr. builds up a lot of strength, or has already a lot of strength in his fingers from playing classical, then you can switch to a 10 gauge as and when, and actually probably wouldn't need to do hardly any, if any, adjustment to this. If you did switch to a 10s and you found that the relief, well, basically I've set it up with a 10 relief on it, so when we put 9s on, it's probably going to flatten out a little bit and it'll still play great. If you put 10s back on it, it'll go back to where we did the setup anyway, so it'll play absolutely fine. But technically speaking, I encourage you at some point to get yourself the Allen key, and I'm not going to do it right now, but have a go at adjusting it and see what happens to the action in the middle of your neck and how it feels. That's the most important thing. And if you do any adjustment, just if you go from here to there and you can't go any further, with the key, make one turn, make a record of how many turns you've done, see what the effect is, go back to where you were. You can't go wrong. And you really can't break it without really swinging on it with 2 hands and put your foot up on the desk. So I always say it's way much better to experiment and get a feel for what it does than to avoid it and treat it like some mysterious black magic thing, Because it's much better that you know what the adjustment does instead of taking the word of some people who've just swallowed some dogma. There's so much crap on forums about guitars, it's just unfunny. And one of them, for example, you'll see people turn up on forums and say they've got buzzing on their strings, on their frets, and you'll usually see some super guru turn up to tell this inquiring newbie to adjust his action by, just raise the action, tweak the truss rod and raise the action, and it's a false piece of information. You don't go to the truss rod in order to change the action on the guitar. An increase in the action in the mid part of the neck is a byproduct of making a truss rod adjustment, but it's not how you change. It's not what you do to change the action. It's a secondary effect of of using the truss rod to do something else. And the only reason you adjust the truss rod is to counter an excessive amount of bend in the neck from the string loading. Let's say you put 13 gauge strings on and the neck's gone like that on the nice thin flexible neck like this. Then you use the truss rod to dial that back until you've got a nice nearly flat neck, but with enough room to allow the strings to spin. Now as you put some curvature into it, remember I said that you will have a higher action than before in the mid part where the neck curvature is greatest, or the midpoint of the curvature. But that's not how you adjust the action. That's a byproduct of adjusting the neck to give yourself the room for the strings to spin. So if you want to raise the action on your guitar, you do it by the nut and the bridge. But knowing that adjustments in the truss rod for other reasons does result in an increase or a decrease in the action in the middle. But when people are talking about a guitar having a high action that they want to alter, or a low action, what they really mean is at both ends. They mean the overall action of the guitar is too high. Sometimes it's too high here and it's too hard to make chords like F and B's and things. Or they'll be saying it's too high here and they can't hold the notes down. So the primary place to alter your action is the nut and the bridge, not adjustments to the truss rod. So when you see somebody recommending that, they don't really know what they're saying. So I recommend that you do, instead of kind of living in a world where you take their word for it, or even my word for it, I'm saying what I understand it to be, and if I don't want you to take it as gospel. I'd much rather you put a key in the end of there and have a look, and I'm pretty confident you'll find what I'm saying is true. But I'd much rather you discover that for yourself than just accepting it, and certainly not accepting it if it's wrong. You could just get on and play this guitar now. It'll be shiny enough, but I like to just run through with this whole set of micro mesh pads to get that last bit of shine going on it. Actually, it's less about the shine, it's more about the smoothness of the bending the notes and so on. A 1500 grit, which is supposedly the same as the last one of the paper ones I did, but they're probably a little bit different from each other, and I don't know which is grittier than the other one, to be honest, but it seems to work. Sometimes I use a sharper point so you can get up and down in the frets, but here I'm using a sort of almost something that's got a bit of a sort of point in the middle, but it's kind of shaped itself to the radius now. I had to cut it a bit like that to begin with, but over time it starts to grow to fit the radius of the guitars you're working on. This guitar has sort of a 12-inch-ish, very close to 12-inch radius, which is same as the Les Paul. And it's one of the reasons why you can have low action, one of the main reasons why you can have low action and still get all the bends working on such a low action. The tighter the radius, the less possible that is. So if this was a vintage Strat with a 7¼ inch neck radius, it would be much rounder, visibly rounder. This is much flatter by comparison, but you'd never get down to 1mm at the last fret action and 1.2 on the bass side. You'd be looking at 1.5 and 1.7 kind of area if you want all the bends to play cleanly. If you're not into bending, you can still get it to play at a low action because it'll play all those notes providing the frets are level. But it's where the geometry or where the amount of curvature comes into play is when you're trying to bend the strings, because you're pushing them up a hill away from their lower anchor points, and the strings have to go back down towards the bottom of the hill to the anchor, or the bridge in this case. And that basically, the more curved that is, the more it cancels out any space that you've got for the string to vibrate. And it reaches a point where it can be such that you'll set the bridge action so low that you just cannot get bends out of it. It's too low to allow the strings to be pushed up the hill and still have clearance. And no amount of fret leveling will take care of that. It's just a product of the basic geometry of the thing. And I had to learn that the hard way, you know, after the first few times trying to level my way into freeing up the bends on a vintage 7¼ inch radius. Okay, so here we have the finished up, polished out frets, and we're now ready for the fun part, which is the unveil. Now this produces a lot of fret dust, so this paper is there to just keep most of it off the body. It won't keep all of it, we still need to dust it off, but it helps to keep the nice pickups that we've already shined up, keep them clean, keep the majority of the dust off it. So we're kind of in that nice downhill coasting mode at the moment. I say the principal is a good condition guitar, and the only thing that had me worried at all was that slight wobble in the shape of the neck down that far end. But actually, you know, even when I was looking at it before buying it, I was very confident that the fret leveling approach that I used would, if there was any issue, would take care of it, which you could see that it did knock off a little bit of a high fret down there, which was a result of that tiny little wibble. It's just wood's organic, and you know, it has its quirks. Okay. Some kind folks have said, why don't you run a piece of paper down the middle of there and rip it all off in one go and the whole lot will come up. Well, I've tried it and it doesn't. This is kind of well stuck down, and you have to do this fiddly bit at the end before you get to your lovely clean shiny frets and your cleaned up fretboard. And like I said, some fresh some oil on the fingerboard now to rehydrate is not the right word, you re-oleate it, and then with the new strings on I'll stretch them out. And having done all this fret leveling and stuff to make this guitar play well, one of the equally important things, in fact it's the priority in my mind for any guitar, is that first and foremost it has to stay in tune, go into tune, stay in tune and play in tune. Any guitar that doesn't do that is not worth playing, and actually from my experience I'll stop reaching for it if I spend more time tuning it than I am playing it. I will give up, and that will be the end of it. I won't bother playing it, and I'll eventually get rid of it. So priority number one is to make it play and stay in tune. Priority number two is that it's light and easy to play. Now we've taken care of number two first in the fret leveling and setup part of it. Now the bit about making it play and stay in tune is really interesting, And Adam Jr., it's worth you knowing this bit, because a lot of people, if somebody says, oh, I can't get my guitar to stay in tune, you'll notice the so-called experts will blame a number of things. They'll blame, very often blame the tuners, these things. It's nothing to do with them. They'll blame the tremolo if it's a, let's say, a Strat style guitar, and it's got nothing to do with the tremolo per se. So the reason the guitar goes out of tune will be one of two things. The first one will be because the nut slots are gripping the strings as they go through, and that friction causes the strings to hold up, snag on one side effectively. Now I need some more of these 9s. Yeah, they'll snag on one side, and or grip or pressure differential from one side of the nut to the other, and that pressure differential either side of the nut, when you bend the string, will reset itself, and it will do that by allowing a bit more of the string to cross through and overcome that bit of friction resistance, and it'll drop back into equilibrium, but your guitar will do that it'll go out of tune in the process of doing that. So first 50, it's worth thinking it like this: 50% of your tuning problems will be because the nut slots are gripping the strings, and you won't know this because you have to be really listening out to know when they are, and you usually will hear it as a slight ping, a very, very fine ping, or feel it as a ping as you're tuning, right? And when I do the nut, if I'm putting a bone nut on or whatever, I will, at this stage, at this point of the game onwards, I will be constantly listening out for any pinging or signs of sticking, which means I need to widen the nut slots with a little bit of sandpaper and a blade. I don't want to deepen the slots anymore because I've already got the perfect first fret action, so I don't want to mess with that, but I do want to kind of widen them so that any part that's creating friction is removed. And so that's 50% of your problem. So getting the nut slots right to begin with is 50% of your tuning stability taken care of. And the other 50% is unreleased stretch or slack or whatever you might want to call it in your strings. And to get rid of that, you have to physically stretch the strings out. Now at this point in time, I'm going to put this back on here. I don't really think I'm going to need to make an adjustment even for this different gauge of strings, so I'm going to start by putting this back on. If I do need to, I'll go under there and do it, but I'll assume it's going to be good. So this nut I've got on here is supposed to be a graphite nut, which is kind of plastic, which is supposed to allow the strings to move freely without any gripping. We shall see whether it does or not. So as I'm putting the strings on now, this is where I'm really looking out for this. I'm trying to get you away from the sunshine a bit. So I feed the string all the way through, and then I put it right the way through, and then hold it there and pull it back 1 fret's worth, and that becomes my start of my winding on. And I'm holding the string, I'm going over the spare string, and then as it comes around the second time, I'm going to pull up the spare strings directly up, and I'm going to direct the held string under the spare string, and that kind of creates a little bit of a lock-off effect. And then once that's in place, I'm going to actually cut that straight off, because there's no really point now having any spare stuff in the way. Okay, and as I was doing that, I didn't hear any pings, and it seemed, on first wind, it seemed like the string was passing through the nut fairly smoothly in a linear fashion. When your slots are right, that using the tuners feels linear, you know, for exactly as much as you turn them. The tuning seems to go up and down in a very smooth fashion. Where you'll know when it's gripping, even if you don't hear the pinging, you'll have a sensation that as you tune, nothing happens, and you won't hear the. Sometimes you get a really distinct feeling of tuning, but the pitch doesn't change, and then it sort of changes in a handful. That is an absolute sure sign that the the nut slots are gripping the strings, and they only move, they let the string through when enough pressure builds up and it pulls the string past the friction, and that's why it will seem to go, the tuning will go in fits and starts. As soon as you experience that, you know you've got friction in the nut slots. Now that will put your guitar out of tune constantly, and you'll never want to pick it up, because you'll spend more of your time tuning it, and if you're playing with other people, with your friends or a band or whatever, jamming with people or in a band, you'll just get so sick of it, you'll just want to give up, because it'll seem like all you're doing is trying to keep the damn thing in tune, and it'll detract you totally from any enjoyment of playing. So this thing, that's why it's number one on my list, because if you have a guitar that stays in tune from the outset, you'll just reach for it all the time. It'll be your go-to. And the beauty of it is, even if it was an odd quirky piece of inverted commas junk on paper, you'll still reach for it, because it's the one that stays in tune, and you'll grow to love it and want to take it with you. But you know, compared to the Gibson Les Paul you might have on the wall that just will not go into tune, and you won't want to take that with you. You won't want to rehearse with it. You might want to go and show it off and have people see you with it, but you actually won't. Ultimately, you'll stop taking it out because it won't stay in tune. So my advice is always keep in mind two things get in the way of tuning. One, nut slots being poorly cut, and only a tiny amount of friction can ruin your tuning. So you've got to be kind of watching out for signs of friction, the sounds and the feel of friction, and if your tuning isn't unstable, it's more than likely the nut slots. And the other 50% is caused by unreleased slack in the strings. Now, when you buy them new and you put them onto a post like this, there will be a whole pile of slack that could be stretched out, and if you don't do it in one go at the beginning, amazingly the guitar will it will release all of that slack. God, these things are intonated all in the wrong place. That's very cool. I should have done that first, but anyway, yeah, you'll find that the unreleased slack will vent itself, if you like, shed itself when you least want it. So every time you bend a note in an important solo and you come back to playing a chord at the end of the solo, your whole guitar will be out of tune because you bent those notes and it squeezed out a bit of the slack that was stored up. And it doesn't really matter where the slack is stored up. I mean, a lot of people have different disagreeing views on whether it's actually in the string itself or whether it's around the post. It doesn't matter. Suffice to say that your new string will hold a bunch of slack, and if you don't physically wring it out of the guitar yourself before you start playing, you will be wringing, or it will be slipping out bit by bit for as much as 2 years, if not more. Now, I'm just looking at this thing here now, and this is absolute, God almighty, who did the intonation on this? It's all over the place. It's completely cockeyed. Right, I'm just going to do a quick adjustment while these strings are slackish, and see if we can go from there. I don't like the Tune-o-matic bridge because there's so little actual adjustment room, travel room for these saddles to do any adjustment, and sometimes you have to spend time taking the whole bridge off, taking them apart, turning them around, doing all manner of crap. But let's see if we can start close to, see, that's wrong to begin with. Oh, I hate it so much. Right, well, we'll get the tuning bit done and then we'll check the intonation, but it looks like we're going to be struggling with this. It looks like I'm going to have to turn the saddles around, which is such a pain in the you-know-what's. Let's just start with that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out the big slack to begin with. Now with 9s gauge strings, you've got to be careful because you have to do the stretching, but 9s are fairly susceptible to breaking during the stretching process. I have a couple of spares up there luckily, ready for such a thing. So the first thing I'm doing is just a little bit of sort of a seating in stretch, and being as careful as I can with that bottom E, the thin E. Now I'll go for a basic tune. Okay, so there's my first tune up. Now, whilst doing that, I didn't hear any pings or anything dragging. Now I'm going to take the strings and I'm going to push them between thumb and forefingers to get the stretch out of them as much as I can, right the way down to the anchor point, and if I can, past the nut as well without damaging them. Or you don't want to sort of kink them around any of the pivot points, so you don't want to bend them or crimp them over the saddles, so you've got to be quite careful how you do it. This is why the thumb and forefinger business does work quite well, because you're pushing against yourself most of the time. Local kids. So what happens is, when you've done this first bit of stretching, you go to tune it up again, and you'll hear straight away that it's detuned. Now that's as much as you stretched out. Moving very positively, a very linear tuning fashion. Okay, that's sounding good. I'm not hearing any friction pulling against the nut at all. So once we get this slack out of the strings, any remaining slack, we should be on for a very good stable tuning. Now, if you've ever heard people who own Stratocasters say they lock down the tremolo bridge because it puts the guitar out of tune, it's not strictly true. The tremolos are brilliant on the Strat. The tremolo is a very effective piece of technology. It doesn't put the guitar out of tune. What it does is it amplifies the effects of both the sticking friction ridden nut slots and the stored up slack in the string, and it will, if there is slack or if there is friction, the tremolo will kind of bring it out and detune the guitar. But it's not the tremolo's fault. As long as you get rid of the slack, as long as you get rid of the slack and the friction in the nut slots, the average budget Strat tremolo will work fine. Okay, I'm just going to do one check while I'm here, because we took the bridge off and it may well be that the action changed a little bit, so I just want to double check where we are. We're on about 1.2 there, and we're on about 1.5 there, so we've gone up a little bit on the treble side, which we don't really want, and we probably need a little bit more on the bass side. I'll just retune to that. Also give it another stretch while I'm doing it. Get the very last bits of stretch slack out of there. Again, really thinking about, careful on that high E and the B, really not to stress them too much. Okay, so we're practically there now. The only thing I really want to check now, as a final stage in the process, is the intonation, and this is tricky with this kind of tunematic bridge. The reason for that is that there's never enough adjustment room to get this right. So with a electric guitar, or any guitar, each string, because of the construction of the string and the thickness of it, each string requires a slightly different length to make it work properly with the neck, whose frets are at a mathematically kind of calculated distance, and they get closer and further apart at a fixed or a certain rate. And one of the key variables in that, the rate in which, where they fall, is the nominal scale length, which is a notional length for this kind of guitar. Now I say notional because in truth each string is slightly different, but on this guitar it's a 24.75 inch or 628 millimeters is the notional scale length, and then from that actually each one is slightly more, slightly further than that. So and what you typically find is each string gets a bit further away, and basically in two groups of three. So we tend to be, the high E is the shortest distance, but it's probably just over 628, and then 629, 630, that kind of thing, and then back to 629, 630, 631. So you get it stepping back. You couldn't really measure it because this distance is too small. So what we do to know whether we've got the right length is we do it by tone. So we tune the guitar on the harmonic ping on the 12th fret, and we get an E, for example, on there. It's hard to see, get in the shadows. Okay, true E, and then we fret it at the 12th fret. So we ping it at the 12th fret to get the harmonic, tune it to that, and then fret it. They should be exactly the same note. In this case they are, which tells me that's in the right place, which is great because I don't want to mess around with this thing. So we're slightly sharp on the B to begin with. That's in 2 as well. Okay. Expect it's going to be here. We get a problem. Huh. Well, you see that basically I've guessed it right. Great. There we have it. So that was good. It was kind of lucky because I've put the bridge on and done the intonation by eye, and I got lucky, well, from experience, and I've got it to the right position. And it goes to show that whilst it's good to micro tune it with using a tuner like that to get the exact, it goes to show that it does follow a pattern, and that if you've done it enough times you can pretty much guess where, not guess, you can pretty much calculate where that pattern's going to cause it to land. And so I had that intonated without even consulting the tuner, just from experience of where the pattern falls. So now I'm going to just have a quick listen, and I'm going to have a feel. Right, that feels much better. It's still tendency to want to tip, but it's now going to stay there. If I had a better strap or less slippery, it's a little bit slippery. I could do with a leather strap rather than this webbing one, but it's very nearly there. In fact, I could do with about another sheet or two of lead in there. I don't think I've got any more room. So anyway, so here we have. Right, what have we got? Okay, tone. bending the last bit of detuning out of it. It's actually quite low output by the sounds of it. That's because the gain is way too far down. Quite a bit higher than the other one. So let's bring the one up or one down. I think I'll bring the bridge up a little bit on this one.
He started firing up. That's enough for now. That's enough. It works. It's good. Plays great. I might have a little look right now. See if I can squeeze another piece of lead into this baby. Because it's not quite 100%, but it's as close, almost as close as we can get it. It's the way it is, unfortunately, with the design. Like I said, that's why I like to make my own, which are correctly balanced from the outset. You don't have to add things in. Now I don't know if I can fit another sheet. I've got a spare sheet over there cut to size, but I don't know whether I can get this in to the same place. I'll try it, but I may have to remove it. So I'm going to tack it on lightly with a bit of masking tape first, before I fit it with the ultra heavy duty stuff. I probably could fit a bit more in if I thought about more of these spaces here that I've kind of missed out altogether. I could put a couple of little blocks in. But let's try it with a little bit of easy removal stuff, just to see if there's actually enough room in the whole place. Right. Like that. Stay. Oh, it's going to drop off, isn't it? It's not going to want to do it. If I put the proper bit on, can I get it off? Well, let's see. Right. If I can't, I'll have to tear it off by hand. That's quite a chunk. So only the worst it's doing is sitting right on top of that. Okay, well it does fit. Good. Okay, that's one more extra bit. I think that's got to be it. I think we're going to leave it there. Otherwise, we could go on forever. But what I'll do is I'll just try it indoors with a more suede-like strap, and I think it'll be good. There's a couple of quid's worth of lead gone in there already, so. But good, it fits. It's amazing how much you can get in. Yeah, right, okay, one second. I'm just going to do something for no other reason than precaution. I think people get freaked out about lead and you know, connectivity. So just in case this runs any risk of touching the metal work in there, I'm going to just cover it up with a bit of Gorilla tape. It should give me a bit of insulation or something, whatever that word would be. There's a little bit sticking out there, so I'll cut that bit off. Cover that bit. Cut that. Cover that. I think we're about right. Probably just press it down the sides there like that, rather than cut it and mess about. That's not very good, that one, but generally that should do. Ready? In you go. Plop. And that will just stop it making any contacts. So, ladies and gentlemen, Adam and Adam Jr., I hope you enjoyed this setup. Epiphone SG 400, I'm told. I will put a Setup by Relove Guitars sticker on it, on the back of the headstock, as I do all my setup guitars. And oh, I'm going to just do up this strap button, make sure it's on tight. Yep, jolly good. And the same with this one. Yep, there we have it. SG 400. Beautiful looking thing, nice and clean now. Extra weight in there, should sit much better on the strap. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, recommend Relove Guitars to your friends, and I'll see you again in the future, hopefully sometime. Thanks for your business.